Welcome to Masters of Self University podcast, your highest source of sacred truths and universal wisdom. Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Rachel Fiori, mystic, spiritual teacher, psychic healer, and founder of Masters of Self University. Join our journey of soul transformation as we deep dive into this latest episode. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Masters of Self University podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Rachel Fiori. So I want to talk about the Dalai Lama and the suck my tongue comment, the video that is being seen and shared all over social media platforms. If you do not know what this is and you haven't seen it, then I strongly recommend before you listen any further to pause this, look it up, watch what you can on it, and then come back and then continue to listen. It would be wonderful if you could just dive in at least a little bit, educate yourselves a little bit about what's going on out there and then regarding this topic, and then you can dive in and understand with an open mind. Okay. So I really want to dive in and talk about what is happening here and what we need to dissect as awakening, truly, authentically, spiritually awakening people. All right. I want an open heart and I want an open mind. There is a lot to educate, a lot of topics rolled up into one regarding this. And let's start here. If you have supposedly earned a title, you are in a position of power, and you have earned a title of your holiness, you don't get to abuse your power. You do not get to abuse your power. And when I watch everything that I have watched, energy doesn't lie. Now, we're going to talk about, it was mistranslated. Dalai Lama doesn't speak English. He used the wrong words. We're going to talk about that, and that we're going to get there in a minute. But I want to say this first and foremost. If you have earned a title and you are in a position of power, you are in a spiritual position of power, supposedly one of the top spiritual leaders in the world, I'm going to tell you right now, I am sick to death of men being put in these positions and then abusing their power. Because when you read energy, energy doesn't lie. Become the ways of oneness, the universal ways of oneness. You can see there's a universal truth in all things. Not my perspective, your perspective, cultural this, cultural that. We're going to dissect that stuff in a minute. Energy doesn't lie. The way of truth. The way of truth. As one of the universal ways of oneness, we have to learn, raise our level of consciousness enough to learn to see the way of truth in all things. And energy, when you learn how to read and translate energy, here is lots of truths here, but here's one of the most important truths to see in this scenario. When you are functioning as the 20 universal ways of oneness, the way of truth is number 4. The 4th of 20 ways of oneness. And the way of truth here is that child's energy was very uncomfortable. He did not want to be touched. He did not want to be pulled in and held and hugged and constantly face touched. He was uncomfortable with the Dalai Lama sticking his tongue out and getting closer to his face. The energy of the child, when you can read energy, you can read the energy of the child was one, and a lot I could translate here, but I'm going to keep it super simple. This child was very uncomfortable with what was happening. Period. End. Very uncomfortable. And here's what I'm sick of. If you are a man, if you're a human, any human, it could be a woman, but men still run the world. So Dalai Lama is not a woman. If you are a man in a position of power like this, actually called your holiness, then at that level, you should have the ability, if you are truly an awakened being, you can read energy and you can translate energy, which means you can read the energy of the child in front of you. And the energy of the child was contracted, very uncomfortable, intimidated, didn't understand what was happening, and therefore was very uncomfortable. This child was very uncomfortable with touch, was very uncomfortable being pulled in and held and hugged. So one of two things is either going on, Dalai Lama. And that is, number one, you have earned the position of Dalai Lama. You have a title of your holiness. You are given these labels that you supposedly earned, and yet you don't have the ability to read the child's energy. So you either don't have that ability, which means you should not hold that position of power, because at that level, you better be able to read and translate energies. Side note, just because you read and translate energies doesn't make you fucking awake, and don't you dare use your egoic mind to misinterpret and mistranslate what I am teaching to you. Just because you can read energies, you have certain psychic abilities, doesn't automatically make you an awakened being either. But if you are truly an elevated being at that level, and you are teaching and leading people, you better truly awaken people at that level as a spiritual teacher. You better be able to read energies, or you should not have a person in front of you at all in the way that this little boy was presented in front of the Dalai Lama. You shouldn't be physically touching that little boy when his energies are telling you, I'm uncomfortable with your touch. I'm uncomfortable with this scenario. So that means the Dalai Lama either doesn't have those abilities, which means rip your title away, you haven't yet earned it. Or he does have that ability and he was dishonoring that child. Dishonoring. One of the universal ways of oneness is the way of honoring. At 20 ways of oneness, the way of honoring is number 11. If you want to learn what the universal ways of oneness are, purchase the 20 universal ways of oneness on Amazon. Read what the ways of oneness are, because there are so many ways that were not presented and offered in this scenario by this man who's referred to as His Holiness. Okay? And this is important to understand. By the way, let me make this very clear for everybody listening. Even if you're understanding this and you saw it and you were kind of, frustrated or angry or disgusted, heal and alchemize those emotions. This is not about judging another person. There is no judgment. There is only education. There's a difference. Raise your level of consciousness enough to discern the difference of what we need to learn from, what we need to no longer tolerate, what is happening in the world, and also what and who we need to strive to become, because there is a difference. There is a difference in educating ourselves and learning from moments like this versus just, I'm on here attacking somebody. No attacking, no judgment, but there's also no tolerance for this bullshit in the world anymore. And there is a difference between the two. So we have to be high enough in our own individual elevation of our own consciousness to comprehend and discern the difference. Okay, this isn't about judging. This isn't about attacking. This isn't about cancel culture. I'm going to go into that a little bit. All the cancel culture bullshit. The second you don't like what somebody does, cancel, cancel, cancel. We have to learn the conscious, elevated skill of discernment of when somebody makes a mistake versus when somebody is abusing their position of power. I'm going to tell you right now, this is an abuse of power. When you are dishonoring, you lack the way of honoring of a child's energy, his comfort level with you, his physical space. That child shouldn't have been touched. So I want to mention, because some people are coming forward and saying that, the Dalai Lama doesn't speak English very well, and there is a loss of translation here. And I'm going to give grace and say, okay, we're going to go with that for a minute. Some people are saying that the literal translation of like, suck my tongue, and you guys can go look this stuff up. I'm not going to dive into culturally what Tibetan culture does, because one of the defenses here in this is, no, time out. You just don't understand the culture. Oftentimes in this culture, they tease and manipulate in order to get physical affection and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's part of your culture that needs to change. Then, sorry. Let me give grace for a moment. You don't manipulate to get anybody's affection. You sure as hell don't manipulate children to get their affection. That's one of the defenses. So I'm just briefly addressing that part. Okay. I don't care what your culture is. This isn't about using our culture, whatever my culture is, as a defense and an excuse to not mature spiritually, emotionally, mentally, grow the fuck up. It is time. It doesn't matter what your culture is. But I want to make this point very clear because I don't want you to misunderstand. 100% things can get lost in translation. Obviously, that should be blatantly obvious. Truly. Absolutely, things can get lost in translation. It can be mistranslated. Things can be said inappropriately. They can be said the way they were not meant at all in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to give grace here, and I'm going to go with this for a minute. I want you to hear this very clearly. I knew somebody, I'm going to give you an example. I knew somebody many years, probably 25 years ago now. This person is a linguist, bilingual, actually speaks several languages, but mostly English, Spanish. And the first time she ever went away as a student, like abroad, and stayed with a family to really immerse herself in the culture and Spanish language, to be able to speak 24/7 in Spanish only. Okay. So she was a student. It was her first time abroad doing this. And on her last day with this family, they were asking her questions like, what are you excited for the most about going home? You know, what do you miss the most about home? And they asked her specifically, what foods do you miss the most that you haven't had since you were here, eating all of our foods from our culture, etc. And she said, oh my God, I just think chocolate and chicken. That's what I miss the most. The first thing I'm going to eat is when I go home is chocolate and chicken. She said, I would even have chocolate covered chicken, except that in Spanish, what she actually said to them translated as, the first thing I'm going to eat when I go home is chocolate covered dick. So she said that in Spanish. Of course, never would she intentionally say that. She would never be disrespectful in front of the family. She didn't mean that in any way, shape, or form. It was she misspoke in another language. And they looked at her at first like shocked, and then they started laughing because they realized, you know, obviously she made the mistake that she made. And she's kind of looking at them like, I didn't think it was that funny. And they said, well, here's what you actually said. And she was like, oh my God. She was absolutely mortified. She was so embarrassed. And she apologized. Like, you don't need to apologize. No apology. Like, it's a simple mistake. No big deal. Here's how and then they taught her, here's what you really wanted to say. And then she said, thank you. And I'm embarrassed. And I'm sorry. And I mean no disrespect. And that's an example of a mistake. It was a simple mistake. And she learned from that mistake. And the family wasn't like, you disrespectful, terrible, blah. They just knew that it was a mistake. They educated her in that moment, and it was no big deal. Okay. We are all human. All humans, no matter how enlightened you become, humans still make mistakes. Mistakes are magnificent. They are beautiful because we get to learn and grow from mistakes. We do. We get to learn and grow from them. And so I'm giving this real life example in order to understand there is absolute truth in there can be misunderstandings. First of all, through video editing, of course, there can be misunderstandings, misinterpretations of how people are portrayed based on editing, not full context of the full scenario. There can also be misunderstandings when people are trying to speak different languages and they're not fluent, and this isn't their native language, and they say something that comes across as, you know, inappropriate. So just as a general teaching, I want everybody to open their hearts. Of course that can happen. Stop with the immediate judgment. There shouldn't be judgment here. There is difference between zero tolerance for abuse of power, misuse of your power, your powerful position. There is a distinguished difference that we have to be able to discern between abusing my power and my role that I have versus making a mistake. We don't cancel people when people make mistakes. We embrace people and their mistakes. We become the ways of oneness, the way of patience, the way of compassion, the way of forgiveness, etc. These are all ways of oneness. This is what we become for others. If I am the universal ways of oneness, when someone else makes a mistake, we embrace, we love, we nurture. We don't enable. We hold responsibility, the way of responsibility. We hold our accountability. That's part of the way of responsibility. What is my responsibility for this? versus your responsibility. Your responsibility is to see that you made a mistake, to learn from it, to grow, to own it. Okay, not make excuses for it, but you just learn and grow. And everyone else's responsibility, the way of responsibility, is to become the way of patience, the way of compassion, the way of truth, the way of loyalty, the way of purity, the way of forgiveness, etc. Do you understand? That is what we are meant to offer other people when they make mistakes. Misabuse of power is different. Now, it doesn't mean you get to suddenly, because this is a poor use of your power, and I'm going to get to why in a minute. It doesn't mean you suddenly get free reign to judge. You should not be in judgment of this man or any other human on this planet. If you are in actual judgment versus just the way of truth, and if you're not a high enough level of consciousness, you cannot discern the difference between zero tolerance for an abuse of power versus judging because somebody fucked up and misused their power. Not the same thing. But if you yourself are not a high enough level of consciousness, you cannot discern the difference. And that's part of the problem we have on this planet right now. Okay? We don't automatically cancel everybody when they make mistakes. That's fucking insane. That's immaturity on everybody's part. Okay? People deserve grace. However, when somebody misabuses their power, no more tolerance for any of it. And that is what I am calling out here. Because let's go back to the example of the language barrier and a difference in culture and blah, blah, blah. Here's where that doesn't work here. No. Because if it is in your culture to guilt children into being touched and giving physical affection, then that is a shadow aspect of your culture. And that needs to be dismantled. It needs to be called out. And everybody needs to grow out of that. We should not be doing that to children anymore. Period. End. You don't get to use your culture as an excuse. And you don't get to hide behind your culture and say, well, it's because of my culture. It's because of my culture. Are you kidding me? That's like any white person saying, well, that's because of my culture that there's so many people that are racist. And if I happen to be racist, sorry, it's my culture. What the fuck? Every culture on the planet has aspects of their culture that are shadow aspects, that are unhealthy, that are harmful, that need to fucking go. I don't care what culture you come from or what you label yourself as. Let me throw something else in here to take you to a deeper level of teaching. All cultures do nothing but perpetuate separation of all of us. My culture versus your culture needs to fucking end. It's ridiculous. This is oneness consciousness. We are all the same essence, manifested into different physical beings where we have unique differences in our appearance, in our gender, in our cultures, where we were born, the color of our skin varies. We are the same despite our unique differences. And within our unique differences, even though we are uniquely different, we are still the same. The essence of us are all the same. No more using culture as barriers to perpetuate separation programs. And that means you can't use the excuse anymore in this new golden age to say, well, it's my culture. Guess what? Every damn culture has some fucked up dysfunctional shit that needs to be healed. Almost every culture on the planet is infused with nothing but fucking misogyny. Well, we just keep doing it. We're just going to keep doing it because that's what my culture says to do. I don't think so. It's time to grow up and awaken for real. Okay? And in this case, in this scenario, we should be already achieved at a higher level of consciousness. This person, this role, should already have achieved the ability to be the way of honoring. And I did not see that and witness that. Energy never lies. But he's the Dalai Lama. He can touch and pull in and hug anybody you want to. No, he can't. That lacks the way of honoring. And that means that also what is lacking here is the way of purity. And what is lacking here is the way of wisdom. Because if you don't have the wisdom to read the energy of the discomfort in this child and act accordingly and respond appropriately in compassion and the way of honoring of this child, their personal space, you can say all you want to that there's a mistranslation, there was a barrier in what was said versus what was meant. Okay, that's great. But you know what doesn't lie is the damn energy. And that child was very uncomfortable. And the Dalai Lama did not respect that child's personal space, his body. Okay, you don't pull children into you and force hug them. You don't touch a child all over his face when they're clearly uncomfortable with your touch. That is not what we do. Awakened beings don't do this. And just because you teach and preach peace does not necessarily mean that you are awakened. What I have seen here is the lack of one of the universal, more than one, but the main one is a lack of the way of honoring of this child. I witnessed it. I am disgusted by the energy of that child, what I feel and translate in that child, and how that was not honored. So I want to take you into a teaching deeper than that when it comes to children. How dare we as adults so arrogantly in our unconsciousness put our hands on children and act like it's okay to force children to be hugged, to be held. It is not okay. I don't care who they are. I don't care if it's your own child. If your child on Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holiday or Sunday barbecue with the family and grandma, grandpa come over and your child does not want to hug grandpa, you don't force your child. It's grandpa, hug him. You can sit on his lap. You can hug grandma. Excuse me? You are teaching your child their comfort, their feeling of safety means nothing. That is what you're teaching your child. You are brainwashing your child that adults can do whatever the fuck they want to do to your child, to their bodies, to their personal space. They can violate and invade their emotional comfort level, their physical comfort level, and the child is supposed to shut up and be compliant and go along with it. That is what you're teaching your child. I saw a mother not too long ago on TikTok expressing her extreme frustration with her husband, was deployed, came home, and the first morning that they woke up, their little daughter woke up and came crawling into bed with them and then was all over mom. And dad was like, I want a hug, I want cuddles. And she wouldn't do it. And then what he did was try to guilt her. Oh, well, you're making me so sad. You won't give me a hug. Oh, that's a big motherfucking mistake. Parents, knock this off. Do not do this to your children. How dare you dishonor your child and guilt them and manipulate them, make them feel bad? You're teaching them their emotions, how they feel in this moment don't matter. You disregard it. You dismiss it. And then you wonder why there's so many dysfunctional relationships later, why that same little girl will grow up and be manipulated and used and do things sexually, for example, that she's not comfortable doing, but she's taught by her own father what you want and how you feel means nothing. It doesn't mean shit to me. Give me what I want. I'm the dad. I'm the adult. I have power over you, child. I'm going to manipulate you and guilt trip you into cuddling with me in bed. She doesn't want to. This is a huge mistake. Why? Because we're not conscious enough to realize what we're doing as parents, as humans. And this is exactly what I saw with this little boy and the Dalai Lama and this whole scenario. All right. So when I was a pediatric therapist, I had for a period of time, there was a large military clientele. A lot of kiddos would come in for pediatric therapy. And one of the moms, it was her husband who was in the military and he was deployed and he was coming back. This child had severe behavioral problems, always around the time. Of course, this is normal. Dad would leave. And then for a while after he left, and then like around 6 months later or so, or 8 months, however long it would be, he would come back. And then severe behavioral problems when he came back. And we were dealing with all of the behavioral problems of the child. And this is, of course, a lot of severe emotional disturbances. And the child was so young, He can't comprehend what's happening and why this person is in his life and then suddenly ripped out of his life. He can't cognitively comprehend what it means to be deployed. All he knows that suddenly dad's going to be gone again, and he can't wrap his mind around it. He can't comprehend it. And so emotionally, he doesn't know how to process all of this, right? So that's what I was there for, to help with all of this. And one of the things that I taught this mom was, here's the biggest mistake people make. Older children, when dad or mom deployed, of course, it could be man or woman, but in this case, dad was the one in the military. When a parent comes back after being deployed, for example, older children, a little bit older, 7, 8, 9, older than that, tend to throw themselves on their parent. They throw themselves on, they hug, they cry, they can't be held enough. The physical affection is usually pretty extreme, like in a healthy way, in a beautiful way. All the videos you see people posting when they surprise their child with mom or dad coming home from being away, right? And then you see this beautiful like hugging and holding and celebration and crying, and it's very sweet. However, in much younger children, that is often not the case. In much younger children, because of their cognitive level, their emotional developmental stage, they can't understand or comprehend, and they haven't seen this person in however long, and it can be very confusing. It can be very scary. They don't understand their own emotions. They don't understand all of the trauma of this person just disappearing and being gone all of a sudden, and then suddenly showing back up. It's very, very challenging for a child to wrap their mind around. They're too young cognitively, developmentally, they can't understand it. And so I taught this mom, when I taught all of this to her, I said, one of the biggest mistakes parents make is to force affection. Don't you dare make that mistake. That literally causes so much more emotional trauma. It causes very long-term damage. And you don't understand the long-term damage psychologically, emotionally, that later on, the child will have no idea that that's what's causing the emotional dysfunction and the dysfunctional behavioral patterns of how he'll show up in relationships later. So don't make the mistake. When dad comes home, he can get down at his level and open his arms. I'm so happy to see you. How have you been? It's so nice to see you. And may I have a hug? Ask for a hug. And the child is allowed to say no. And the child hesitates and doesn't say anything. You take that as a no. You take that as a no, which means, oh, it's okay. It's okay if you don't want to hug me. That's okay. You don't have to give me a hug. It's okay to stay right there. I'm so happy to see you, though. Can we go play a game? Would you want to go play with your favorite, toy? I said, get a favorite game, get a favorite toy ready, and then begin to engage in ways like that. And some children are so sensitive, they can't even do that. You have to learn your child. Okay. If they can't do that, that is okay too. This is the way of honoring, meeting them at their level. This is harmlessness and gentleness. The 8th of 20 universal ways of oneness, harmlessness and gentleness, is safety. I am emotionally safe for you. I am the emotional safety for you. This space is emotionally safe for you because I'm creating that, because I am the way of harmlessness and gentleness. If I am harmlessness and gentleness, I am honoring. I am the way of honoring. I'm not going to force anything on you that you're not ready for, you're uncomfortable with. I am the way of purity. All these ways of oneness, you see it. I am the way of loyalty. I am loyal to your mental, emotional development and safety, your psychological development. I am loyal to the healthy development of you psychologically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Do you understand? That is an aspect of the way of loyalty. When I am the ways, I automatically, as an elevated being, offer this to you, child, human, woman, man, adult. It doesn't matter. Animal, dog, dolphin. It doesn't matter what being we're talking about. I am loyal to your development, to your healthy psychological, mental, emotional development, spiritual development. I am loyal to you feeling safe. That means I'm loyal to being compassionate, the way of compassion, to harmlessness and gentleness. So when as my example, I taught this mom, Let your child decide when he wants to approach dad. Let him, and then reward that. Oh, it's so nice, buddy. And give a pound. Sometimes this little boy would feel unsafe for a long time. And then, but he'd give give a pound. And I'm like, if that's, yep, give me the pound. And if that's what he does, oh, awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks, buddy. And it's like, that's what you can reward him for, that he felt safe enough. And you're actually rewarding him. You're not teaching him, that's not enough. I want to hug instead. No. And when you really are harmlessness and gentleness for that child, you let them feel safe, them feel comfortable, and do it on their own time in a very loving, nurturing, the way of patience, the universal way of oneness, the way of patience. You're patient with them. They will feel safe enough with you to then give more or receive more. Do you understand? Okay. If you understand that, you can understand that we do not function in these ways yet. And with people who have positions of power, this is the radical teachings that I offer. We don't make excuses for people in positions of power. You don't have an excuse to not honor this child in his energy with you, Dalai Lama. You don't have an excuse. You were dishonoring of this child's energy. Take the words you said, take that out of it. We don't even have to say, look, the cultural difference. Look, it was a misinterpretation. It was a mistranslation. Okay, I'll give you grace. Let's say all of that. Put that all aside. And what you failed to do was become and show up the way of honoring, the way of harmlessness and gentleness at minimum for this child in front of you. You didn't do it. And as a label, as the title of your holiness, you have zero excuse to not show up in that way. Zero excuse to not show up in that way for this child. We need to be better and more elevated. And that is not a judgment. That is the way of truth. And this is the kind of stuff that we should have zero tolerance for in the world. No more tolerance for this anymore. No more tolerance. Oh, but it's I don't want to hear it. Everybody's culture has fucked up shadow egoic bullshit that needs to be healed, that needs to be alchemized, that needs to be elevated above and beyond. No more using your culture as excuses, because all that does is promote and perpetuate separation, separation, separation. Me versus you. And I get to stay at a low level of consciousness because of what my culture says, what my religion says, what my ethnicity says. How unconscious are we really? Just because you are spiritual does not mean you are actually an awakened being. And in this case, there is zero excuse. These people, this child was not coming to Amma, the hugging saint, for example. In that case, you're going to be embraced by this woman. That's what she does for a living. She's known as the hugging saint. By the way, if you ever want to have the most amazing, magnificent, miraculous healing hug that you've ever experienced in your life, if you have not been hugged by Amma, please go get hugged by Amma. The most amazing. She's Amma, the hugging saint. If you don't know who she is, look her up. Years back, I went to Los Angeles, California, in the United States for an event that she was holding because I really wanted to be hugged by this woman. I really wanted to be hugged by her. Her energy is incredible. She's amazing. She's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful soul. And man, does her team have this shit down pat. Wow, the efficiency. They literally have a team of like 4, 5, 6 people who, when it's your turn to be hugged by her, they pick up your body, they place you on top of her chest, her bosom. She embraces you, she talks to you, she heals you, she hugs you, she holds you, the most nurturing, beautiful thing. But let me tell you, you can understand a situational difference here. Every single person going to her, child, adult, anybody, they understand they are literally going to be embraced and touched and physically held and embraced by this woman, like hugged by this woman. You understand? Now, here's where parents could make a mistake. If you have a young child, you are teaching your child, yeah, let's practice. This is what Amma's going to do. You should be teaching and preparing your child, especially their age, developmentally, cognitively, emotional developmental stage, psychological developmental stage, requires different preparation strategies to teach your child and prepare them for what's to happen so that it's not traumatic experience, that it doesn't feel violating to them. And even when you're there watching everybody else get hugged, you're gonna be hugged. Are you ready? Are you getting excited for your hug? And here's the deal. If your child in a scenario like this is, no, I don't want to do it. Oh, that's okay. You don't have to do it. Mommy's going to get hugged though. It's my turn. I'm going to get hugged. And then you show your child it's safe. And if they still don't want to do it, they don't do it. That is the way of honoring for the love of Christ. That is the way of harmlessness and gentleness. Even with the hugging saint, you don't force your child to do it. But you understand this example I'm giving you for a reason is a situational difference. I have a niece, an 8-year-old niece. And there are times when, the family gets together and I'm excited to see her, and she runs up and throws her arms around me. I pick her up and I swing her around and I hug her and I'm very affectionate, and I'll swing her in a circle and I play with her, and we're very physical with each other and affectionate. And there are other times when she just doesn't want to come near me. She's very clingy with mom, or, my life partner with uncle. She's much more affectionate with him and wants more attention from him in that moment versus me. I honor wherever she's at. She doesn't want to be clingy or huggy or affectionate with me. She doesn't have to be ever. She doesn't have to touch me. And I don't ever force that on her, because I am the way of harmlessness and gentleness. I am the way of compassion. I am the way of patience. I am the way of purity. I am the way of honoring of where she is, what her energy is, where she is emotionally, mentally in that moment with me when she's interacting with me. Just because I'm her aunt doesn't mean I have a right to hug her and be affectionate with her when she doesn't want to. How dare I be that arrogant and entitled? How dare I be that dishonoring of someone else's physical body, of their personal space, of emotionally what they want or don't want in any given moment? You guys, we do this in marriage. We do this in romantic relationships all the time. Because you're in a romantic relationship with somebody doesn't mean you are obligated to be physical or sexual with them ever. And I mean ever. You're not obligated to give sex. You're not obligated to get sex just because somebody's your partner. That is a fucking dishonoring, objectifying, enslavement, ownership type of programs that we are running on one another. And we still do it all over the place to this day in relationships everywhere. That you are obligated to have sex, or you expect it in your relationship, instead of honoring somebody, because emotionally they might not be in a place where they want physical or sexual affection at all. They don't want sexual intimacy at all. They don't want it. They don't have to want it all the time. And the way of honoring means, where are you at? That is okay. Is there anything in the relationship that's going on that we can heal in order for us to reconnect in this way? And you don't reconnect just to get sex. That's a mistake too. Okay? I want you to understand these teachings, because we can no longer dismiss the abuse of power in people when they're grabbing children and pulling them in and hugging them without asking permission. May I give you a hug? It's okay to tell me no, because a lot of kids freeze for all the reason I just explained, all the reasons I've just explained to you. Sometimes kids will stand there frozen looking at you and they won't say a damn word. They won't shake their head no. They won't say anything. And if we are truly awakened beings, we can read that energy and we can say, oh, it's okay to tell me no if you don't want a hug. It's okay. You can say no, but it's okay to say yes if you would like a hug. I'm happy to give you a hug. Is it okay? And if a child still doesn't respond and they are frozen, you say, I'll tell you what, let's do a pound. Can we give a pound instead? Is that okay? Can you give me a high five instead? Is that okay? How about a high five? And then you feel safe enough to touch and to be touched. You're teaching the child that it is okay to say no. You are teaching a child how to honor themselves and use their voice to set a boundary with other people. Let me tell you, you don't understand that we set the entire world up for rape culture when we dishonor physical space the way that we do. You don't understand. These are the fundamentals of what create inequality, what create rape culture, and the level of all of this that I've explained so far. I've mentioned several ways of oneness. One of them that I haven't mentioned yet until this moment is the way of equality. You are not seeing this child, another being, as equal to you when you use your power to force hugging, touching on the face, affection. You shouldn't be touching this child. He was uncomfortable. That means you see this child not as your equal. Okay? If you did see this child, anybody on the planet as your equal, you would honor their space, their bodies. When you do not see another human being as equal to you, you see them as objects that you can do whatever you want. You expect them to give you a hug. You expect them to give you sex in the relationship. That means you lack the way of equality, which means you lack the way of trust. You lack the way of harmlessness and gentleness. You are certainly nowhere near the way of honoring. All of these characteristics, these enlightened characteristics that we do not yet understand, comprehend, let alone become. We haven't become the ways of oneness yet. The universal ways of oneness are our guide to be better humans. So this isn't about judging. Get that out of here. That's just a program of judgment. That is not the ways of oneness. This isn't about simply, don't misunderstand. It is about an education that we need to show up and be better, more elevated, more conscious humans. It makes zero difference how spiritual you are. Just because you're spiritual does not mean you are authentically awakened. I don't care how many crystals you carry around in your goddamn pocket or wear. I don't care how much meditation you do. That doesn't equal a true, authentic awakening. It doesn't mean you're an awakened being just because you participate in spiritual things or wear spiritual clothes or say spiritual phrases or, do yoga or do all the things. We have to awaken for real. We have to be better people. We have to have a greater degree of spiritual education to understand all of this stuff. And don't you dare say that because somebody is a goddamn monk and they sit around meditating, praying all damn day, that automatically means they are actually awakened beings. That does not mean that they are awakened. And that is what we have to wake up to for real. The current president of the United States of America, all of the videos that have been shown and shared about the way that he touches children constantly, and they are uncomfortable and they don't want to be touched by him, hugged and embraced and held. Children even move their shoulders to get his hand off of them. That is a dishonoring. That is a lack of consciousness in that man. Not to mention the previous president is telling everybody in the world, grab women by the pussy. Like these are the role models that we have, that men all over the world are dishonoring people's bodies, their personal space. Holy Christ, the divine masculine is the way of harmlessness and gentleness, period, end. That is a divine masculine energy. The universal way of oneness, number 8, harmlessness and gentleness. That is a predominantly divine masculine energy, and we are fucking missing that on this planet. And enough is enough. At the objectification of people, of women, of children, viewing them as property, like you own them, viewing everybody as inferior to you. All of this needs to end. The way of equality, we lack that on this planet. The way of equality is the universal way of oneness, number 9. You cannot have trust if you lack equality. Number 10 is the way of trust. You never earn trust if you don't first master the way of harmlessness and gentleness, the way of equality. Only after you've reached that level, that you've become harmlessness and gentleness and the way of equality, only then can the energy of trust actually exist between two people. And after the way of trust, guess what comes next? The way of honoring. If you violate my personal space without my permission, you are not the way of trust, and you are not the way of equality, and you are not the way of harmlessness and gentleness. And that means you're not the way of compassion, which is universal way of oneness, number 7, which means number 6, the way of connection. You are not the way of divine connection. You are creating a connection that is based on authority, position of power, distrust, a lack of safety. Do you see how this works? So you become the way of truth. You become the way of presence. You become the way of connection, which leads to compassion, which leads to harmlessness and gentleness, which leads to equality, which leads to trust, which allows you to be elevated enough to then become the next way of oneness, the way of honoring. And when you are all of those ways of oneness up to the way of honoring, which is number 11, guess what? You will never look at another soul again as inferior, as not equal to you, as an object, as someone that you can violate, even on the most subtle ways, which we dismiss and ignore because men have been allowed to do this to everybody, to women and children, and even other men for centuries. And this level of abuse is prevalent with men in positions of power, with people in positions of power. It is prevalent with people in religious positions, spiritual positions, leaders of country, governments. They abuse their power and they lack the harmlessness and gentleness. They lack trust. They lack equality. They lack honoring because they haven't become that yet themselves. And this is the era where all of that ends. No more tolerance for any of it. No more excuses for it. No more justifications. All of this is being dismantled. It is done, and I am calling it out on all levels. No more. No more do we tolerate this. And don't you dare say it is innocent. This is the last point I'm going to make about this. It isn't innocent to violate a child's personal space, to not read that child's energy, to not honor that child and how uncomfortable they are in any given moment. That is not innocent. That is an abuse of power. That is a blatant refusal to awaken to a high enough level of consciousness where you have become the universal ways of oneness so that you can read the energies of somebody in front of you. That never means you enable. It never means you tell another person what they fucking want to hear. That is not enlightenment. I'll enable you. I'll let you stay in victim consciousness. I'll let you stay in your powerlessness programs and your codependency programs. Okay. Anybody who is a teacher, a leader in any way, shape, or form, and especially in the spiritual world, we are here to unlearn what spirituality has become. That's what I am here to do. We have to unlearn it. Anybody out there promoting anything that is predominantly, teaching, oh, I'm a spiritual teacher, but I'm teaching neediness and codependency and all this garbage that I see out there, all this over-sexualization that I see out there. The United States, in our culture, we over-sexualize women and everyone all the time. And we say, oh, that's sexual liberation. That's spiritual. No, it fucking isn't. You're brainwashed and enslaved just like everybody else is on the planet. You're just brainwashed and enslaved in a different way. You've been brainwashed to believe that your over-sexuality, that's to objectify yourself by showing all your skin and all the things that's what you identify with as your value, the most superficial thing about you. That's just another form of brainwashing that we've had in this toxic patriarchal culture. It's two sides of the same goddamn coin. Dishonoring, objectification, that you are over-sexualized versus the flip side of the coin is sex is bad. Cover up everything head to toe. Cover up all women. And we are brainwashing people that what they want, how they want to show up in the world is dishonored. It is dismissed. It is disrespected. We don't see people as equals. We have a lot of growing up to do. We have a very deep level, a very high level of spiritual education that needs to happen and occur in this world right now. And I absolutely encourage you to start with the universal ways of oneness. There is no wavering of how we should show up in the most elevated divine ways when we learn the 20 universal ways of oneness. There's no such thing as dishonoring and making those mistakes. And by the way, if you make them, again, there's a difference between making mistakes and abusing your power. We will make mistakes and we will learn from those mistakes. If you are the ways of oneness, if you are becoming a truly enlightened being, then you will make mistakes. You will still make mistakes. And you will say, oh my gosh, I meant no dishonor. I am the way of responsibility, the first way of oneness. I take responsibility for the mistake that I made. That was a poor choice. I am learning from that. And in my way of honoring you, and in my way of becoming the way of responsibility and the way of honoring, among other ways that might be appropriate for that particular situation, I am the way of harmlessness and gentleness. I want to apologize to you. I own that I made a poor choice. I own that I wasn't reading the cues and I violated your privacy. I violated your personal space, for example. This is when we don't learn to honor other people in these ways. This is why this situation is a good teaching example. We don't violate someone's energy emotionally, how they feel, how uncomfortable they are. I mentioned earlier, this is what brainwashes us and sets us up for rape culture. I mean that very literally. Why? Because this is what happens when two people are in a situation and they are in a sexual situation, and suddenly one person starts to become very uncomfortable. They were all loving what was happening before, but now we crossed a boundary where I'm no longer comfortable and I don't want to continue, and I don't, even in the act of sex, I'm suddenly uncomfortable. I don't like this. This isn't what I want or what I thought, or I just suddenly feel very uncomfortable and I don't want to be doing this anymore. The way of honoring, the way of harmlessness and gentleness, among the way of trust and the way of compassion, the way of loyalty to your safety, you as a divine being, is, oh my God, that's okay. We will stop. Absolutely. What can I do in this moment to make you feel comfortable and safe? And that doesn't mean comfortable and safe so we keep fucking. Get the hell out of here with that shit. Grow up and be better people than this. It's, what can I do right now to make you feel supported, safe, emotionally with me? I never want to make you feel uncomfortable. Is there anything that we can work through together? What do you need from me right now? I am here in the way of honoring of where you're at emotionally and how you feel physically right now in this situation. That is the way of honoring. And it is okay to suddenly stop and say no and to change your mind. That is the way of honoring. We teach the opposite in our world when we are having our little kids. Oh my God, but it's the Dalai Lama. He should be able to touch you and pull you in and hug you and do whatever the fuck he wants. No, he shouldn't be able to do whatever the fuck he wants to your child. And you don't use the ignorant, spiritually unconscious excuse that that he has this title. He should be the one teaching the way of honoring of what that child does or does not want from him. Because here's the bottom line. I, as a spiritual teacher, as a spiritual leader, with my abilities, with my healing abilities, if that child does not want to, in my presence, be touched by me in any way, they don't have to be. They get the healing simply by being in my presence. I can activate and give more healing, more blessings to that child, and they never, ever have to touch me or be close to me. Do you understand this? And if they are able to, if they feel safe and comfortable with me to touch or to hug or to embrace or to offer something on a physical level, I can offer that as well, and I can do more, and I can go deeper with them in a certain way. But that is only in the way of purity, only in the way of honoring, only in the way of wisdom when my divine guidance says it is okay, and that way of honoring that child, that person themselves say it's okay. I don't care if their parents say it's okay. If that child says no, the answer is no. And this is what we need to learn from this. This is what we need to learn from this. This is a highly teachable moment. Don't you dare perpetuate ignorance, dishonoring, and a lower level of consciousness because somebody has a goddamn title out there. You don't blindly follow anybody. You don't blindly follow anybody. I don't care who they are, what their title is, or because they're a man, you listen to them and you don't listen to someone else. How dare we continue to perpetuate such a horrible way to live and what we've set up in the systems we've set up in this world. You don't blindly follow. You go within, you learn to connect to your own intuition, your own divinity, and your own divine power. And then you listen to people who offer you the truth and the people who always tell you to go within and connect to your soul, your power, and let you, your higher self, be the one who truly guides you of who to listen to, of who to follow. If you're following anybody in codependency or just to blindly follow, You need to grow up and heal yourself and connect to your own power, because you are powerful. And we need more people on this planet to be powerful and to promote individual power. That means divine power. Do you understand? So learn from this. Learn from it. You yourself, be better. Be better than this. Learn from this moment. And if you want to learn more, or if you want help in learning that, you want help connecting to your internal power, you want help to learn what that actually means, you want to learn how to actually honor each other in your relationships, whether they're business relationships, romantic parent-child relationships, learn what it really means to be harmlessness and gentleness with your children, never enabling, never spoiling. That's not harmlessness and gentleness. You want to learn how to gain these qualities and become these things. Come to Masters of Self University, visit our coaching programs, join our group classes, participate in the things that we have to offer, because that's what we do here. Okay. And you, of course, can always go buy the 20 Universal Ways of Oneness on Amazon and start there and read that book. In any way, we're here to help. We're here to guide. We're here to teach. This level of spiritual education, it is time. We are rising above the unconsciousness that has been perpetuated in the world. Stop with the titles and thinking just because someone has a title means they can be trusted, or they should be listened to, or they should be followed. We have to grow up and grow out of that parent-child program. You have it in you. I know you do. Thank you for listening, and I'll see y'all in the next episode. Bye for now, everybody.